Remember that time in 1884 when Union tried to blow up Confederate forces from underground but ended up screwing themselves over in the process? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Abyss Watch. The Battle of the Crater, a pivotal engagement in the American Civil War, unfolded on July 30th of 1884. It marked a desperate attempt by Union forces to break the stalemate and gain an advantage over the Confederate forces. And Petersburg, where the Confederates were holding out, served as the back door to Richmond, the Confederate capital. Lieutenant Colonel Pleasance, a mining engineer, proposed a plan to break the impasse. And in late June, a Union regiment began digging tunnels under the rebel fortifications. And as the tunnel neared completion, the Union forces planned to pack 4 tons of gunpowder into these tunnels directly under Confederate lines, essentially creating a ticking time bomb that would blow a giant hole in the Confederate defenses. And on June 30th, right before 5 a.m., the fuse was lit. The ensuing explosion would make a crater that was over 170 feet long, 60 to 80 feet wide, and 30 feet deep. And the plan was successful. The explosion was able to take out an entire Confederate battery and the majority of one of their infantry regiments. And quick side note, but can you imagine being one of the Confederate soldiers further down the line? Like it's 5 a.m., there's all of a sudden a giant explosion, a massive hole in their defensive line, and almost an entire regiment just gone. And you'd think with all this chaos and the Confederate lines in shambles that the Union would be able to, take advantage of this situation, turn the tides of the battle, and launch a full offensive, right? No, and here's why. See, the planning for this mission was so bad that even when the explosion went off, the Union forces were just flat out unprepared to take advantage of the opening. And when the more than 15,000 Union soldiers finally did get it together and managed to mount an offensive, they made the slight tactical error of running into the crater rather than around it. Now, in my research for this video, when I read that, I physically cringed because it makes you wonder, like, what would have happened if they had just followed the plan? And at this point, the Confederate lines were still in shambles, so the Confederate generals and forces, seeing the Union troops essentially making their way into a kill box, quickly reorganized to begin firing down from the edges of the crater onto the Union soldiers. And on the early afternoon of June the 30th, the same day that the siege began, the Union armies retreated. Now, this egregious tactical error was mostly pinned on General Ambrose Burnside, the corps commander of the troops involved in the failed siege. Now, there is some debate as to if General Burnside is the only reason why the attack went bad, as right before the battle, the original plan was changed by George Meade. See, the original plan by General Ambrose involved several regiments of African American soldiers, but General George Meade feared that the optics for the operation wouldn't have been good, because if the mission were to go south, it would look like they were throwing regiments of African Americans into essentially a meat grinder, which would not have been good for public sentiment. And thus, shortly thereafter, General Meade changed the plan to several regiments of soldiers that were unprepared to make the charge, had little to no information about the layout of the landscape and the official plan, and it ended in utter chaos and a complete embarrassment for the Union forces. And this would mark the end of General Ambrose's career, because shortly thereafter he would end up resigning. So yeah, that's about it. The Battle of the Crater is remembered as one of, if not the worst tactical failures of the entire Civil War, and is seen as a major missed opportunity by Union forces, one that could have turned the tide of the whole war if they were able to get into Petersburg and eventually make their way to Richmond, where the Confederate forces were hiding out. So that's about all I have for you guys today. Next video is going to be dropping soon. Not sure what it's going to be on yet, but we will find out in time, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, thanks guys. See you.